I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm thrilled to be talking about the fantastic film Unicorns. I am joined today by cast members Ben Hardy and Jason Patel, along with co-director Sally El Hosaini and co-director and writer James Krishna Floyd. And James, I actually wanted to start with you in terms of the writing and development of this story, because I know that you had already had a bit of an idea of the story that you wanted to tell, and then you met Asifa, who became a consultant and co-producer on the film, but is really prominent as the UK's first publicly out Muslim drag queen. And I was interested in how that relationship really opened up the idea of how you wanted to tell this story specifically as well.
Yeah, so I mean, I've forgotten how many years ago it is now. It must be about 9 or something like that. But yeah, I got to know Asifa Lahore around then, and I'd always known about the Gaysian scene, the British Asian queer scene, which is kind of underground, but it's also an open secret within the South Asian community. And really, I always wanted to make a movie that was set in it, and I knew the scene a little bit, but I hadn't got to the kind of beating heart of it. And getting to know Asifa was that key. And really, it was we connected over social media when I used to use social media properly, and we had a meal in King's Cross at a Nepalese restaurant, and I basically just pitched this idea of, look, I want to make a film set in your world, but I would never do it without your blessing. And luckily, she had seen a film that myself and Sally had done years ago called My Brother the Devil, that Sally had written and directed, and I'd acted in, and she'd really loved it. And that was really where it started, and that was how I just kind of got to know pretty much every single Gaysian drag queen that's ever lived on the island of the UK, and the whole Gaysian scene, and the whole story came out naturally out of that, because all of the real life Lukes, they're there, and it was a sort of amazing moment where, I'm half Indian, half English, and it was this, and I realized that because there are so many Lukes in that scene, the scene itself was a bit like me. It was trying to connect these two seemingly disparate worlds, and that was where I kind of knew I had my story really.
Yeah, I really, really love that. And Sally, I know that for you, you've mentioned that you thought like the romanticism was really the heart and soul and center of this film. And I was interested in the creative choices that led you to make throughout the film and really wanting to center it in that way.
Yeah, I mean, it was all there in the script, to be honest. Like the script, I fell in love with the characters because I've been hearing about the development of the script and how it had been progressing with James, and had read various drafts. And I fell in love with their worlds, who they were, the characters, and I didn't want to miss out. I wanted to go along on the journey. And it was, also being kind of from a mixed background. Um, I loved the kind of identity and the fluid nature of that in the story, and but really at its heart, it was the love story that got me, and I felt that it could really transcend what it was even on the page or the story, to just be a timeless love story about two beings, because ultimately, you know, love is love, and we just fall in love with people. So that's really the message I was, trying to put out there with the film.
Absolutely. And Ben, in developing the character of Luke, I know that you thought really specifically about the culture and the society of masculinity that he would have been raised in. And I was interested in how that really helped you to develop who he was going to be in your performance.
Yeah, I mean, I did think about it. Didn't require too much research. I'm from that sort of environment anyway. I'm not from working class Essex, but I suppose the sort of stoic aspects, or those aspects I was kind of familiar with. But yeah, I suppose it's always helps in establishing the world. But to be honest with you, like most of my prep on this film was basically done in James and Sally's spare bedroom, up until like 2 a.m. in the morning, before they had to go and do the school run at 6 a.m., whatever. So like we literally would spend hours and hours. I think we would do page turns on the script where we would in an evening maybe get to page 10, from page one. And like it was fantastic. Like it was, no actor could ever show up to one of their films claiming to be unprepared, as much unless they didn't show up to the rehearsals.
Yeah.
It was so rewarding. So
I love that. And Jason, in playing Aisha and Ashek, it's the same character, it's the same person with two different sides and two different senses of self and identity. And I was interested in how you really thought about the different layers and the different textures and the different sides of your character.
Yeah, I guess approaching them separately was really, really important because there was like a really hard line. And then actually, how do you kind of soften that line? And how do you get the eraser and kind of like rub it out like visually? And what kind of things like kind of slowly blend and melt into each other, which is really, really important. And so it was like a lot of like instinctual work that was really married with like a lot of technique and a lot of just knowing the context at which these two people live in and how those worlds collide. And just how you do that with just like love, care, and respect was really important. So yeah, I mean, I couldn't have done it on my own. I literally had to do it with Sally and James and Ben, which was nice because then you get loads of different perspectives, and it meant that there was just so much to play with.
It's wonderful. And Sally and James, I know that you specifically kept Jason and Ben separate during all of pre-production, and it feels like that must be something that also really lent to the building chemistry and tension that we then get to see on screen and the discovery they have of each other. What was it that led to that specific choice and that intention?
Well, that was a huge thing. It was literally straight after Jason had done his incredible screen test with Ben, and their chemistry was just, I mean, we've spoken about it a lot, but it was off the chain. Like, it's something you just can't buy.
This screen test should be a DVD extra.
It should be a DVD.
Should be.
I have it
It's
on
an
my,
exclusive right now.
Yeah.
I have it on my laptop actually. But it was yeah. So when that happened, me and Sally we were on the train on the way home, and we just sort of looked at each other, and we both had the exact same thought, which was, these can't get to know each other too well. They can't become too familiar, because then they won't be able to literally discover each other emotionally and physically on screen. And we're a huge, Sally and I are obsessed with realism. It doesn't mean we only want to do dramas that are grounded, but it's like we just feel that performances need to feel lived in. And we're not really a fan of acting, And I think the more that you can help actors, and everyone on set actually, to have that environment to just be free and real, I think the better for any film. And it was just a no-brainer. And then of course the big thing was just asking Ben and Jason whether they were okay with that. And then the big thing was, without revealing too much about the film, the first scene that they were going to shoot together was was an intimate scene. And the whole point was that they were discovering each other in that moment. And that's, I think, why that scene, I love that scene, because you really, when you have those extreme close-ups of both of their eyes, it's so real. There's no acting from Ben and Jason there.
Also the tension, the nerve, that energy, the electricity, it was all there just because, the whole crew bought into this idea because Ben and Jason did, really, which, is a testament to their bravery. There was an excitement, like, no hair and makeup test or costume fitting overlapped. So you two have been kept apart. I mean, how did it feel like for you, like coming into that?
Yeah.
Obviously, it's like soul bearing, but also like it's about trusting the person to be like, I knew that we were in the same position together. Do you know what I mean? So I was like, as vulnerable as I am going to be, I know you will be too.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, well, I'm not alone experiencing this whole thing in a weird way. We're going to jump up a cliff together.
And it was a closed set as well. It wasn't it's like,
Oh, yeah.
We live streamed it on Facebook.
Yeah.
It's on James's laptop.
But there's also an incredible amount of restraint in your performance and so much internalization of everything that Luke's going through. And, James has been very restrained with the dialogue with the character as well, very intentionally so. And so I wanted to ask you about just really finding that side and finding the inner world of the character and how you broached that.
I suppose my process on this was quite different to other things I've done. I think I developed a sort of very technical way of working, almost, or overly cerebral kind of way, maybe. I think it was a control aspect. I would kind of dissect scenes left, right, and center to try and sort of really try and pin as much as I can and do what I wanted onto the things I was working on. But then when I met with Sally and James, they kind of said, like, Luke's the kind of guy that doesn't really think that far ahead, and that's not an offensive thing. That's just he's a very sort of primal, primitive sort of being. And I think you got me at Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now, you know, which is now a very you know, popular book, less so then, but still known. But yeah, it was just sort of embracing that aspect. And the things you said, like, I'm really pleased when I watched the performance. I'm very pleased to see that internal world is visible, you know, and about, because there is something reassuring about having words to say, because it's, you get to communicate to, you know, and express, and it's a lot to trust that. I also wasn't watching playback. That was something that we all decided together, Sally and James, because again, that was me trying to control my performance and aspects of my performance. But when you're not watching playback and you're expressing is, you know, what you think you're expressing, what you're feeling in that scene, but you don't get to say it to make sure the audience knows, and you don't get to watch playback to make sure that it's expressed. There was a lot of trust and faith required on this film for me, and trust well placed, I think. So yeah.
Yeah. And Jason, when we first meet Aisha, she comes across as someone who presents with a lot of confidence in the world, but there's so much fragility to her at the same time. And so I wanted to ask about just finding that outer confidence, but the inner fragility of the character and how you approach that.
I think me inherently as a person is quite confident, but I think also, I guess in terms for Aisha, finding that balance, like the confidence is her armor that protects that fragility, that stops her from shattering. Yeah, but in terms,
still looking for notes now.
No.
You still looking for notes. Yeah. Okay. What do you think?
Yeah. No.
But I think all that fragility is obviously inside. I think to her it's quite physical as well, just because of the layers that she and the process that she goes through to feel so confident. That is a big labor of love that's in there that kind of welds it all together. You know, it's a super glue.
It's a super glue.
Yeah.
James and Sally, to Ben's point, when you watch the film, you can really see the internal world of Luke, but also with Aisha as a character as well. And it feels like a lot of that comes from the close-ups and the way that you just kind of capture these little looks that they exchange with each other throughout the film, you know, even down to the karaoke scene where just the way that Luke's looking at her completely changes in that moment. How did you set about figuring out how to capture that when you realized that the dialogue was going to be more pulled back at certain moments?
I mean, that's cinema, isn't it, really? I think, you know, words can be very overrated sometimes. And certainly with a character like Luke, you know, he's a physical specimen. He's not a poet, you know, as Ben's alluding to. And in some ways, you know, his depth is something that is all going to be in the eyes and contained in his body, and it's an extraordinary performance from Ben. And then obviously with Jason, his challenge was the opposite, was that I think, you know, Aisha kind of can be a bit of a chatterbox and can be, you know, has a lot to say, which I think in some ways makes it just as hard, because even though, as Ben was alluding to, you know, that as an actor, you can read that script and go, oh, wow, I've got lots to say and I get to express loads of things. The key is to not make it monotonous and the same. And the complexity that Jason brought to that was amazing. But there is something about, I think, cinema where you don't want to explain too much to people, but you also don't want to be too opaque. And I think you're always having that balance as a writer, but also as filmmakers. And
Yeah.
There is something, I agree, about these moments where if you can just put a camera on someone and they just have a look or a feeling, it can convey a million things. But that ultimately is casting, and that's where I think Ben and Jason were extraordinary.
Right.
And
when you have the right actors for it, it works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also, like, on the surface, it's a story that might appear completely unbelievable.
Yeah.
So, you know, these are two characters from such very different backgrounds and worlds. You know, for us, the challenge was always going to be taking an audience from perhaps a skeptical place of utter believability. And that's when you have to trust also your actors, you know, as they trust us, we trust them as well in those moments. You know, that putting the camera on those close-ups and very intimate framing is going to, like, bring that honesty forward and take the audience on an emotional journey that they believe, rather than anything you can say and act, and the camera doesn't lie. So, the actors can't lie either. So yeah, I think it came down to us realizing that we needed to make a film that was utterly emotionally believable. And that was where those creative choices and the intimacy needed to come from, so that the audience felt they were on the inside of the relationship rather than overthinking it from the outside and seeing, I don't know, walls and barriers to it.
Absolutely. And Ben, to James's point, Luke is quite a physical character. How did you find the physical embodiment of how you wanted to portray him, especially as he softens and that changes a little bit throughout the film?
Yeah, it's funny, people talk about that sort of softening, that physical softening. I think that that wasn't something that I'm very pleased to hear that, and I suppose I can kind of see it when I watch it as well. But that wasn't something that was consciously sort of manufactured. That's something that just kind of came through performance. We discussed his physicality, and there was Matty Shonart's performance in Rust and Bone was kind of a touch point for that, which is a fantastic film. But yeah, so I did try to put on some weight in the time that we had. I did put on a bit of beef, which was great. I got to eat so much, Mara. It was fantastic. It was like, oh my God, if I have to eat these chips, I have to eat them, And then I did a lot of sort of pull-ups and push-ups, because that was sort of, and free weights, because that was sort of what Luke could work with as well, just to sort of feel that physical sense. And then the shaving of the head actually really helped as well, just to feel physically different. But also I was doing a lot of press-ups, which I do sometimes do, but I'm sure you guys will remember non-stop press-ups, which just really helped. So I don't know, just made me feel physical and helped the blood sort of be pumping through my veins. Just it definitely made me feel something. And then, but to your point of the softening, it's very much just about like our dynamic and the performances in the scenes. I think like Jason's performance is incredible, and like really stop it. Yeah, really just like yeah. I was falling into the role, falling into the scenes, and that's kind of what happens. Yeah.
It's interesting to hear you say as well that those aspects were kind of unconscious. And I was curious if that was also the case when you have the scene where Luke goes to visit Aisha's family, because it kind of felt like it was leaning into his masculinity a little bit more, especially with her father, because he knows that that's something that he's going to respond to.
It was it would have been an unconscious decision, but I suppose it would have been informed by the motivation of winning over Ashek's, I suppose, father. But 1,000% would have been informed by that. I mean, the choice of bringing up his own son, all of that scene is geared around sort of, I suppose, convincing him that he has a normative life, talking about like, oh, he came to see me at the garage, he doesn't have a car, all that kind of stuff. And the son, especially bringing up with his son, I think. So yeah, all of that, definitely that motivation informed physicality for sure. But it wasn't conscious.
Jason, I also know that you have such a background as a musician and performer in that regard as well, and particularly in performing Aisha in this film and seeing her perform at these events. I was interested in how that idea of movement really came into the character from your musical side as well.
Yeah, I don't know. It was actually really fun, because then you kind of get to see Aisha feel like she's living out her like dream, as like a stage where like this is her moment to shine, where she fully feels like herself and feels seen, because everyone's giving her this like external validation and approval that she's like wanted in this world, which I think like for Aisha and Ashek, that's kind of like a spark for when they come together. I feel like there'll always be Ashek like in Aisha and vice versa. But like that's the moment where they kind of fuse, but they don't necessarily know it. And I think that's what was like so beautiful, because like even though they're in drag, and it's obviously a very specific type of like realism drag, it's kind of where all these different elements or like amalgamations of themselves can really come together as one and just feel free.
No, I love it. Sally, also going back to what you were talking about in terms of the romanticism, I love the details whenever we see Aisha on screen. There's a lot of hues of red light, and even just like looking at her apartment, that neon heart light that's in the apartment, and just some of the details in the decor. And so I wanted to ask you about really visually creating that world around her.
Yeah, I mean, but really that came from when we were going around looking at locations as well. You know, we always knew in the construction of these worlds that we wanted them, you know, Luke's world to be almost be lacking in color, and Aisha's world to be so full of color, you know, and also to show the similarities then between Ashek's restrained palette, echoing Luke's home life as well, and that where, you know, the color comes into Luke's world. And we had lots of discussions about that as we were like building it, with the set designer Rob, and also on camera and with lighting and with David, the cinematographer. So that was absolutely intentional and something we lent into. Yeah, it was
Like
part of
it
it.
comes from a reality as well. It's like, you know, you said a really interesting thing earlier where you were saying that one of the most important things about making this film was to convince people that, you know, it could happen, that the story could happen the way it could happen. And that's one of the great things I think about, you know, surprising but authentic stories. You know, often reality is wilder than fiction, right? And really, like, you're talking about these incredible colors of Aisha's bedroom, and you mentioned the lack of color in Luke's world. That's all comes from reality. Like, all the real places that we were showing our HODs were, I
They
mean,
were already like
they
that.
were already like that a lot of the time. Obviously, you need to zhuzh it up a little bit just for kind of practicalities of filming and whatever. But like, it's all there, and I think that's one of the proudest things that I have about this film, is that there are some people that kind of think, oh, there's no way that this could happen or this could work, because they haven't been in that kind of environment. They have never experienced Aisha's ever, and maybe never experienced Luke's in their life. But actually, this is a story that is happening in East London, you know, and a lot of that is to do with all of these things that you're talking about, but ultimately coming from truth, you know.
Absolutely, and there's such a family component to it as well. And Jason, I wanted to ask you in particular about filming the scene where Ashek is with his mother and essentially has a coming out conversation, because I thought it really captured so many emotions and so much about their relationship together, which is so different to the relationship that he has with his father. And so I was interested in just finding all the textures of a moment like that for you.
That was such a I loved filming that scene with Nisha. It was like so like homey, and I think she also naturally just feels like she's my mother, which I guess also really just stands a testament to like casting and just making sure that people have chemistry. A lot of that was like, I remember when we filmed that, just like so much like stillness and like softness, and really looking into each other's eyes as well. And it feels like it's like a confessional that he, like, it felt like it was the right time to like open up, because he could see that she knew what was going on without having to say anything. And it felt like, oh, he needs to make it clear so that they're kind of on the same page, but also just to kind of test the waters, because he knew that he could trust her. And I remember like, I had to hold back the tears in that scene, and Sally and Chase like, don't cry, don't cry. But it was just like so, yeah. Honestly, it was just like really beautiful and kind of really cathartic in that sense. Not in like an actual way, but I just felt for these two people to kind of evolve their relationship to the next level, because she could see how much he was hurting, or they were they were hurting, you know, and wanted to be there because they wanted to find a footing or a sense of understanding.
No, it's a beautiful scene between the two of you, and I really, really loved everything about this movie. You've all done phenomenal work with creating all of these incredible textures and layers to it. So congratulations on the movie. Thank you so much for talking about it.
Thank you.
So much.